I want you to just take a second and picture the White House, not the one we always see, the postcard image, pristine lawns, the iconic portico. Stability.
Right.
Because if you look at the sources we've pulled, the reality on the ground right now is it's a paralyzed construction zone. We're talking cranes just frozen in the air, huge piles of dirt under these harsh floodlights, and a literal hole in the ground where the East Wing used to be.
It's a really striking image. And this isn't just, a project running behind schedule. This is a full-blown legal and political crisis, all stemming from a midnight ruling by a federal judge.
A ruling that didn't just tap the brakes on the president's, $400 million ballroom project.
Oh, it slammed on the brakes. It stripped away executive privilege and stopped the whole thing cold.
And that's exactly what we're unpacking today. This isn't about architecture. We're looking at a collision between, I guess, personal ambition, federal law, and just the cold, hard reality of economics. We're going to dive into this 40-page injunction that stopped it all.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating look at how things can go wrong. We're going to look at how the administration allegedly used national security as a cover for a vanity project.
And how the money for it just vanished.
Completely vanished. And we'll get into the humiliating ultimatum the court has just handed down.
So let's start at the beginning, the vision. How did we even get to the point where bulldozers were tearing up the White House lawn in the first place?
Well, it all started with the president's view of the East Wing. He basically deemed it obsolete. The sources, they detail all these complaints that it was cramped, not grand enough for modern state functions.
He wanted something to rival European palaces, right?
Exactly. High ceilings, tons of glass, a total overhaul. And the price tag was sitting right at $400 million.
Okay, but you can't just, knock down a wing of the White House like you're renovating your kitchen. There are laws, preservation acts. This would normally take years of hearings and approvals.
Years? I mean, you can't touch a brick of the People's House without a mountain of paperwork. So the administration, they knew a project like this wouldn't survive that kind of public scrutiny they used to bypass.
The national security exception.
That's the one.
So how on earth do you justify a ballroom as a matter of national security?
You argue it's not just a ballroom. The legal team's argument was that this was a dual-use facility. They claimed that, yes, the surface would be a beautiful reception hall, but underneath it all, they'd be building advanced bunkers.
So replacing old, deteriorating Cold War-era safeguards.
Precisely. The argument was, this isn't a party room, it's a shield for the continuity of government. And you know what? Initially, it worked.
The court bought it.
Well, courts are very hesitant to second-guess a president on security, so they said, okay, if this is for the president's safety, you can bypass the usual preservation hearings. But, and this is the crucial part, the judge attached two big conditions.
Conditions that I'm guessing were not met?
You're guessing right. The court said, you can demolish the old wing, prepare the site, but you can't pour a single drop of new concrete until, 1, you provide final architectural plans that actually match these security claims.
And 2,
you prove the $400 million in funding is fully secured and irrevocable.
But they didn't wait, did they? They started tearing things down almost immediately.
They moved with what the court filings call manufactured urgency. The idea seems to have been to create, irreversible physical facts. If you destroy the old building fast enough, you force the court's hand. You can't just leave a hole there, right?
It's a high-stakes game of chicken with the judiciary. Which brings us to the money. The promise was that taxpayers wouldn't pay a single cent.
That was the big promise. It was all supposed to come from private benefactors, wealthy supporters. But now that these court filings are unsealed, we can see what that funding actually looked like.
And it turns out the money just wasn't there.
It was never there, not really. The funding was just informal verbal pledges. The judge calls them casual understandings. No contracts, no escrow accounts. It was all just theoretical money.
But these are billionaires. Why would they back out of a pledge to the White House? This is where the story gets really wild and connects to the global economy. Something about the Japanese bond market.
Yes, and this is so key. We have to talk about liquidity. When you're a billionaire, you don't have billions in a checking account. Your wealth is tied up in assets, in stocks, in leveraged positions.
You're paper rich, but you might be cash poor at any given moment.
Exactly. So right as this demolition was happening, there was a huge disruption in the Japanese bond market. Yields spiked. Now, that sounds abstract, but it sent a shockwave through the global financial system and triggered a wave of margin calls.
Okay, so a margin call, for anyone who doesn't trade stocks, that's basically your broker calling and saying,
Hey, the assets you borrowed against just tanked. You need to give us a ton of cash right now to cover your losses, or we liquidate everything.
so these donors, who had casually promised $50 million for a ballroom, suddenly their own empires are at risk.
Correct. They're in a scramble to save their own portfolios. And the first thing to go is a voluntary, non-binding donation. The sources say donors just ghosted the project overnight. One of the big ones formally pulled out just hours after Treasury officials called to, ask for the cash.
That is an absolute disaster. You've got a demolished wing of the White House, and your donors have vanished because of something that happened in Tokyo.
It's a perfect storm. And the judge was. I mean, he was incensed. He accused the administration of a deliberate bait and switch. He said they destroyed a federally protected landmark based on financial speculative optimism.
Speculative optimism. That is a
Yeah.
very polite way of saying they gambled with American history.
It is. The court said you can't tear down a national monument based on a handshake deal that disappears the second the market gets shaky.
So the money's gone. What about the national security argument? The bunkers. Couldn't they still argue that the government has to step in and pay for it because it's essential?
That was their backup plan. But that leads us to the third and maybe the most damning revelation from these documents. The judge ordered a classified Secret Service assessment to be unsealed. The White House fought hard to keep it hidden.
And when you read it, you understand why.
It completely demolishes their case. The Secret Service, the actual agency in charge of protecting the president, they opposed the project.
Wait. They opposed the security upgrade.
They did, for two big reasons. First, the excavation itself. By digging that deep, they exposed the foundations of the main residence to all sorts of threats. Hostile surveillance, drone attacks.
Because the construction itself was a security risk.
A huge one. But the second point is even worse. It's the design. Remember, the president wanted a European Talus feel. The plans called for a heavily glazed structure. Lots and lots of floor-to-ceiling glass.
I think I can see where this is going.
Yeah.
Glass doesn't stop bullets.
The Secret Service assessment was brutal on this point. They called the design fundamentally incompatible with protective hardening. You can't have a secure bunker that's also a glass greenhouse. It's a security nightmare.
So the whole national security justification was a lie. They wanted a glass box but claimed they needed a bunker.
And that contradiction is what finally killed their legal argument.
Mm-hmm.
The judge saw that assessment and ruled the national security claim was a pretext, a sham. Because the design didn't match the story, the legal shield just evaporated. That's why he felt he could strip away executive privilege.
Wow. It just shows you can't reverse engineer a legal excuse. You can't start with, I want a ballroom, and then just slap national security on it and hope no one notices the blueprints.
Exactly. Credibility is everything. And once the judge saw the security argument was hollow and the money was a mirage, he had no choice. He issued the injunction.
Which brings us to today. A hole in the ground, no money, and a court order. What happens now? They can't just leave a crater on the White House grounds, can they?
Well, the optics are already a catastrophe. Think about it. Every foreign leader, every news crew, they all see this disemboweled wing of the White House. It's a giant visual symbol of dysfunction.
It's got to be incredibly embarrassing on the world stage.
It is. And the court's order is incredibly strict. The administration has exactly 30 days from the ruling.
30 days to do what?
To prove that verifiable private funding exists, not pledges, not promises. They have to show the court actual cash sitting in an escrow account.
Which, given that all the donors fled, seems impossible.
It's virtually impossible. And that triggers the second part of the order. If they can't show the money, they have to execute a comprehensive remediation strategy.
Okay, remediation strategy. What does that mean in plain English?
It means they have to fill the hole back in. The order is explicit. They have to backfill the entire excavation, regrade the terrain, and plant grass over it.
You're kidding. So the East Wing would just be gone.
As a structure, yes.
Yeah.
It would cease to exist. They would have to literally bury their own project and turn it into a lawn.
That is just staggering. The builder president would end up overseeing the demolition of a wing of the White House just to replace it with FUD.
One of the sources calls it an inescapable daily indictment of reckless excess. And think of the political fallout. The president looks out the window of the Oval Office, and instead of his grand ballroom, he sees a patch of dirt where history used to be.
It shatters that whole aura of the presidency, doesn't it? That idea of total mastery and control.
It's completely shattered against the reality of steel, concrete, and the bond market. It proves the presidency is powerful, but it's not all powerful. You can't bluff a federal judge who has the receipts.
And for the average person, who has to get a permit for a backyard deck, this must just seem so reckless.
It erodes trust. The next time any administration comes forward and says, we need to do this for national security, everyone's going to be so much more skeptical. They've burned through the benefit of the doubt.
They really have. And fixing that trust is going to be way harder than just filling in a hole. So let me just recap this. We started with a $400 million dream, justified by a security excuse the Secret Service rejected, funded by money that never existed, and now stopped by a court order to literally bury the whole mistake.
That's the whole wild story in a nutshell, a collision of hubris and reality.
It really makes you think about legacy. Presidents want to build libraries, add something to the landscape.
Right.
But here, the lasting physical mark might actually be a void, an empty space.
And a void can be a very powerful symbol.
Which brings me to the final thought I want to leave everyone with. If they are forced to fill in that hole, leaving just grass where a piece of American history once stood, it becomes a kind of monument in itself, a monument to the limits of power.
It really does.
But the question that I think will haunt this administration is, how do you recover your authority when your signature triumph becomes a permanent, visible scar on your own front lawn? Every helicopter landing, every state dinner, every photo op will be framed against the backdrop of the project that failed. Can a presidency project strength when the view from the front porch is a daily reminder of its own overreach?
That's the question, and I guess only the next few months will tell us the answer.
Indeed. Thanks for walking me through all this.
Anytime. It was a pleasure.